wind never stopped in Copper Hollow. It rolled off the high plains, dragging the smell of dry grass and horse sweat through the yard of Doyle's relay, the last stagecoach stop before the mining camps. The sun was going down low and orange behind the ridge, and Clara Doyle stood at the gate with her arms crossed tight over her chest. She had already made up her mind. If the rider coming toward her looked honest, if there was anything left in his face worth trusting, she wasn't going to offer him a wage. She was going to offer him her name. The horse under him was worse off than he was, ribs showing, head hanging low with every step. The man himself wasn't much better, hollow-cheeked, sunburned, a canvas coat gone gray with trail dust. He stopped at the fence post and didn't dismount right away. Just looked at her, like he was deciding if she was real. "Ma'am," he said. His voice came out rough, like it hadn't been used in days. "Name's Ezra Marsh. I don't need much. Grain for the horse. Maybe the hayloft for the night. I can work for it." Clara looked past him at the empty road behind. No dust cloud chasing him. No one coming to claim him. Good. That was one thing in his favor. "I don't need a hired hand, Mr. Marsh." She let that sit a second. "I need a husband." Ezra went still. His hand froze halfway to his hat brim. "The territory's giving me 30 days, she said, before he could ask. "My father's gone. The deed's in my name alone, and there's men in this county who think that means it isn't worth the paper it's written on. The railroad wants my spring. A man named Pruitt's already filed papers saying a woman can't hold ground by herself." She kept her chin up. "I can't pay you a wage, but I can put your name next to mine on that deed, and half of everything this station earns is yours. That's the whole offer. Nothing more than that." Ezra looked at the barn falling in on itself, the fences leaning like tired old men. Then he looked at her, steady, unblinking, waiting on an answer she'd clearly given up expecting to like. He had no family left to write to, no town waiting on him, no particular reason to ride on rather than stop. "Your word's good enough for me, ma'am," he said. They rode into town before the light was gone. The courthouse was small, and the clerk who married them didn't look up from his ledger more than twice. No flowers, no fiddle, just 2 signatures, and a Bible held out for a hand that barely touched it. "I do," Ezra said, flat as a nail driven straight. "I do," Clara answered, and felt nothing behind it but relief. When they stepped back out into the last of the daylight, husband and wife on paper only, a man in a fine gray coat was already waiting across the street. Colton Pruitt tipped his hat. He was smiling, and that smile said, plain as anything, this wasn't over. Not even close. The days settled into a rhythm neither of them spoke about out loud. Ezra took the hayloft, same as he'd asked for that first evening, and didn't push past it. At the supper table, he ate what was put in front of him and said little. Clara said less. 2 strangers bound by a signature, careful not to make it anything more than that. But he worked like a man who owed a debt he meant to pay in full. He was up before the sun most mornings, mending fence posts that had been leaning since her father's last bad winter. He rebuilt the barn door off its broken hinge without being told it needed doing. He treated the land and her, from a careful distance, with a kind of quiet respect Clara hadn't expected from a drifter with nothing to his name but a tired horse. She caught herself watching him work sometimes, and not knowing quite what to do with the feeling that came with it. Pruitt wasn't done, though. 2 days after the wedding, he rode out to the station himself, hat in hand, smile easy as a snake sunning on a rock. "Mrs. Doyle," he said, "not Marsh, never Marsh. The railroad's prepared to make you a generous offer. More than fair, given the circumstances." He glanced at Ezra like he was something Clara had tracked in on her boot. "No need to keep fighting a battle you can't win." "The answer's no, Mr. Pruitt," Clara said. "It was no before the wedding. It's no now." He left smiling, and that was the part that scared her. The generosity didn't last. A week later the spring ran foul, most likely, poured in overnight by hands nobody saw. The relay's horses turned up scattered 2 miles into the hills, spooked loose from a corral that had held them fine for years. Nothing anyone could prove. Nothing that needed proving, really. Everyone in Copper Hollow understood exactly whose money was behind it. The town understood something else, too, or thought they did. The Reverend's wife stopped nodding to Clara after service. Stagecoach passengers started asking to be let off at the rival relay 20 miles out rather than be served supper by that scandal out at Doyle's. Clara heard the word bought more than once, always just loud enough to reach her. She held her chin up through all of it, but it cost her something every time. At a town gathering that autumn, a barn social nobody invited them to, but nobody could stop them attending. The whispering followed them the moment they walked in. Clara felt it crawl up the back of her neck. She kept her eyes forward and her spine straight, the way her father taught her. Then Ezra reached over and took her hand. He didn't look at the whisperers, didn't look at the Reverend's wife turning her back. He just held Clara's hand, plain and steady, in front of the whole judging room. The first time he'd touched her since the courthouse. It wasn't much. It was everything. Nobody said a word to them the rest of the night. Nobody had to. Riding home after, the wagon wheels creaking under a sky gone full dark, Clara finally asked what she'd been holding back for weeks. "Why'd you really do that tonight?" she said. "You didn't have to. You could have let me stand there alone. You could have saddled up and left a long time before now. Nobody would have blamed you." Ezra kept his eyes on the road. His jaw worked like he was chewing on the answer before he'd let it out. "Truth is," he started, and stopped. He didn't finish it. Just let the silence take the rest of the sentence, and the wagon rolled on into the dark toward home. Ezra had no obligation to defend a marriage that was only ever business. Do you think he stayed out of honor, or had he already fallen for Clara without letting himself admit it? Tell us your take in the comments below. The nights had grown cold enough for a real fire, and that was where they ended up most evenings now. Not because either of them planned it that way, but because the kitchen hearth was the only warm thing in a house still finding its shape around two strangers. It was Clara who spoke first, one night when the wind outside was picking at the shutters. "My husband was a good man," she said, watching the flames instead of Ezra. "Thomas. We had 3 years together before the typhoid took him. I nursed him myself. Sat right there beside that bed and watched him go. And there wasn't a single thing I could do but hold his hand and lie to him about how it'd be all right." She pulled her shawl tighter. "I built this station up alone after that. Told myself I didn't need anybody else's name on the deed. Told myself a lot of things." Ezra was quiet a long moment. The fire popped and settled. "I had a wife once," he said finally. "Back before the war took what it took. Come home to nothing. House burned. Family scattered to God knows where. Half of them not living to be found. I've been riding west ever since, looking for a reason to stop moving." He looked at her, just briefly, then back at the flames. "Hadn't found one. Not till a woman offered me her name instead of a wage." Neither of them said anything else. They didn't need to. The silence between them had stopped being awkward weeks ago. Now it just sat there, warm as the fire, holding something neither of them was ready to name. Whatever this arrangement had started as, it wasn't just business anymore. Not by a long way. Across town, in a narrow office above the land office, Colton Pruitt sat with a lamp burning low and a folder open in front of him he hadn't touched in days. The survey inside was a lie. He knew it down to the last falsified line. The boundary redrawn on paper to make Clara Doyle's water look contestable when it never had been. He'd built his whole career on documents like this one. Told himself it was just business, same as everybody told themselves. But he kept thinking about the barn dance, about the way that Drifter had taken her hand in front of a room full of people ready to tear them both down, and hadn't so much as blinked. Pruitt had spent years around men who folded the second the wind turned against them. He hadn't expected to see the opposite out here. A man with nothing, standing his ground for a woman he'd married on paper. It didn't sit right with him. He couldn't say exactly why. He closed the folder without deciding anything and told himself he'd sort it out later. The storm came up fast that night, the way they did out on the high plains, no warning, just a wall of cloud rolling over the ridge and swallowing the stars whole. Rain hit the roof of Doyle's relay like gravel thrown by the fistful. Ezra went out to check the horses were secured. Clara banked the fire low and stood at the window, watching the yard disappear into sheets of gray water. That was when she saw it, a shape, moving slow through the rain toward the gate. Stumbling. Alone. Clara's hand went still against the cold glass. Someone was out there in the storm, and they weren't going to make it much farther without help. Clara was out the door before she'd thought it through, rain soaking her through in the time it took to cross the yard. Ezra was right behind her, a lantern held high against the dark. The shape at the gate was a man on his knees, one hand gripping the fence post like it was the only solid thing left in the world. His horse was gone, thrown, most likely, when the wash below the ridge road flooded without warning. Papers were scattered around him in the mud, ink already bleeding off the pages in the rain. Ezra's lantern caught the man's face. Colton Pruitt. Clara's first instinct was to leave him there. Every reason she had told her to. This was the man who'd fouled her spring, spooked her horses into the hills, tried to buy her out from under her own name. But the frontier had a code older than resentment, and she'd been raised inside it same as everyone else out here. You didn't leave a man to the weather, not even one who deserved it. Get him inside, she said. They hauled Pruitt into the kitchen and set him by the fire, stripped of his ruined coat, a blanket thrown over his shaking shoulders. Ezra wrapped a gash on his hand while Clara put coffee on. Pruitt said nothing for a long while, just stared into the flames like a man who'd lost more than his horse out there in the flood. When he finally spoke, his voice had none of its usual polish left in it. The survey, he said. The one questioning your claim. It was never real, Mrs. Marsh. He looked up, and there was something raw in his face that hadn't been there before. I falsified it myself, on the company's order, months back. Your spring was never contestable. Not for one day. I've built 4 years of my career doing exactly this, taking land from people who couldn't afford to fight back in court. Clara's hands went still around the coffee pot. Why tell us now? She asked. Pruitt looked at Ezra, then at Clara, then at the small warm kitchen around them. A home built out of nothing but a signature and stubbornness. Because I've spent years around men who'd have left me in that flood without a second thought, he said. And you didn't. I've been telling myself it's just business for a long time now. Watching the two of you, I'm not sure I believe that anymore. For a moment, it felt like the danger might finally be over. The truth was out. The lie behind Clara's 30-day deadline had a name and a confession attached to it now. Then Pruitt's face changed, and the moment collapsed. There's something else, he said quietly. The company doesn't know I've come around, but they've noticed I've gone quiet on this account, and quiet, to them, means unreliable. He swallowed hard. They've already sent another man to Copper Hollow. Name's Whitlock. He's not here to negotiate. He's here to file the claim directly with Judge Harmon, who's been in the railroad's pocket for 2 years running. He doesn't need my report to do it. He'll use whatever numbers the company hands him. Then your confession's worth nothing, Ezra said low. Not unless the real survey reaches Judge Harmon's bench before Whitlock's hearing, Pruitt said. I've got it. Unaltered. I kept a copy hidden away. Insurance. In case the company ever turned on me instead of the other way around. It's the only proof left that Clara's claim was never in question to begin with. The fire cracked in the silence that followed. Outside, the storm was already beginning to ease, the worst of it rolling east over the ridge. 3 people who had every reason not to trust each other sat now bound by the same narrow hope. How long do we have? Clara asked. Pruitt didn't look away. The hearing's set for 1 week from today. 1 week. That was all the time left to save everything Clara's father had built. Pruitt spent years helping the railroad take land from families like Clara's. Do you think one act of honesty is enough to redeem him? Or should he still answer for the harm already done? Tell us your verdict in the comments. The Copper Hollow Courthouse hadn't seen a crowd like this in years. Every bench was full, ranchers, shopkeepers, even the reverend who'd once refused to look at Clara across a church aisle. Word travels fast in a small territory, and everyone wanted to see how this one ended. The railroad's lawyer stood first, smooth and certain, laying the falsified survey across Judge Harmon's bench like a man setting down a winning hand. He spoke of boundaries, of contested water rights, of a woman who'd married a stranger simply to dodge the law. Whitlock sat behind him, arms crossed, confident this would be over inside the hour. Judge Harmon reached for the papers. That was when Pruitt stood. Every eye in the room swung toward him, including Whitlock's. whose confidence dropped away all at once, replaced by something closer to alarm. "Your Honor," Pruitt said, his voice steady despite what it was about to cost him. "That survey is a fraud. I falsified it myself, on company order, to manufacture a claim against land that was never legally contestable." He stepped forward and laid a second folder on the bench beside the first, the real survey, unaltered, the one he'd kept hidden as insurance for exactly this moment. "This is the true boundary report. I'm prepared to testify to everything on the record, naming every name involved, including my own." The room went dead silent. Whitlock rose halfway out of his seat, then sat back down, understanding there was nothing left to salvage. It cost Pruitt his career that day. He knew it would, and he did it anyway. No shots fired, no blood spilled, just paper, testimony, and a man's nerve holding steady in front of the very company he'd served for years, and it was enough. Judge Harmon dismissed the claim before noon. The railroad's grip on Copper Hollow's water broke for good, right there in a courtroom, without a single drop of violence. Clara walked out into the sunlight that afternoon a free woman on her own land, for the first time since her father died. But peace brought its own kind of ache. A few days later, she found Ezra on the porch with his bags packed and his horse saddled, same as he'd arrived, a man ready to move on now that his part of the bargain was done. "Spring's here," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Land secure. You don't need a husband on paper anymore, Clara. Reckon it's time I let you have your name back to yourself." Something in Clara's chest went tight and desperate all at once. "Is that what you want?" she asked. "To go?" Ezra looked at his horse, at the long road behind the ranch, then at her. "I've been moving my whole life," he said quietly. "Never once wanted to stop until I came through that gate." "Then don't," Clara said. "This stopped being business a long time ago, Ezra. It stopped the night you fixed my fences in the rain, without me asking you to. I don't want a husband on paper. I want the man who stayed." Ezra set his bags down on the porch boards. He didn't say another word. He didn't need to. They married again that spring. A real wedding this time. Wildflowers instead of bare courthouse walls. A fiddle player from town instead of silence. The whole of Copper Hollow came, including the Reverend's wife, who brought a pie and an apology in the same basket. Pruitt sent a letter, read aloud at the gathering, admitting everything he'd done and everything he was sorry for, the closest thing to making it right that a man in his position had left to give. In the years that followed, Doyle's relay became the most trusted stop on the line, known from Cheyenne to the mining camps for one simple rule: no traveler turned away, however desperate, however far from home, because Clara and Ezra never forgot what it cost them, almost, not to be shown mercy themselves. The wind still rolls through Copper Hollow the way it always has, dragging dust across the same fence posts Ezra once mended in the rain. But listen close, and it carries something else now, too. The sound of a home that almost wasn't, built by two people who had every reason to expect nothing from each other and chose to give everything instead. Sometimes the stranger at your gate isn't asking for a meal. He's the answer to a prayer you never said out loud. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video, drop a comment below, and subscribe to Sarah's Wild West Chronicles for more frontier stories of courage, betrayal, and love that refuses to break.